Senator Josh Hawley says that whistleblower David Grusch's claims surrounding unidentified flying objects is pretty close to information he received in a briefing after the United States shot down a spy balloon as well as other UFOs this past winter. Hawley told the outlet Wired, quote, "The takeaway from the briefing is that they had thousands of sightings of these things over the years, which was news to me, so I'm not surprised necessarily by these latest allegations because it sounds pretty close to what they kind of grudgingly admitted to us in the briefing."
All right, brother. So here we are, UFO time. First, are they going to happen? And is it going to be the real deal and not just government officials being given a pass by saying, oh, it's classified, it's too sensitive, can't talk to you about it?
Yeah, I'm going to bring in, I hope to bring in the gentleman you discussed earlier, as well as some other folks. I'd like to have a pilot, a Navy pilot. You know, I don't want to bring anybody from the Pentagon. They've been responsible for covering this thing up for decades. I don't trust them. You know, they lose over, since I've been in Congress 5 years, the last 5 years, they failed every audit, yet nobody in Congress has the guts to ask them to correct their problem.
What about the scientists? You know, intel matters, but you know, there's spin involved with that. There's interpretation about how to message it and what it matters. And that starts to take us away from what we need here, which is somebody who's looking with a discerning eye to say, here's why we think this is what it is, and here's why, if it's the case, we don't know.
John, happy birthday. There's no way that I can sugarcoat this. I was talking to a gentleman about the UAP report, and he contends the Pentagon has alien bodies and crafts. So I just wanted to run this past you. Does DoD have these things, and if so, where?
Jeff, the UAP task force is really designed to take a look at these unexplained aerial phenomena, try to help us get a better understanding of them. Again, I'm not going to get ahead of the report that the DNI will submit, that we are helping, obviously, and providing input to, and I think I'll just leave it at that, Jeff.
Michael, nice to see you again.
Good to see you, Michael.
All right, let me cue up the story for our listeners who have been abducted by aliens and been on Mars for the last week and missed this whole story.
Nice.
Published in The Debrief, which I'd never heard of before. It's a webzine for science, technology, and defense news. The authors were Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, who are well-known ufologists who have written about this subject many times, including in the New York Times. For some reason, the New York Times turned this story down. The Washington Post was interested, but needed more time to fact check. Apparently, the whistleblower's name was leaked early, so they wanted to get on this before somebody else did. That whistleblower is David Grusch. He is a former intelligence official and whistleblower, and those authors, and I guess today will confirm that he is who he really says he is. This is not some just hoaxing of us all here. He tells us that the U.S. government and its allies have in their possession intact and partially intact craft of non-human origin, along with dead alien pilots, and they have been secretly studying them for years. There have been many UFO crashes, he says, of many different type of alien ships and even alien beings, the pilots, some of which apparently are malevolent. Maybe he hinted at even having murdered humans. The craft are made of, quote, exotic origin, non-human intelligence, whether extraterrestrial or unknown origin, based on the vehicle morphologies and material science testing and the possession of unique atomic arrangements in radiological signatures. He hints that the aliens might even be multidimensional. They might not just be biological beings coming from some other solar system. Some are huge in size, like the size of a football field. They go back decades, almost a century, to 1933, in which a craft was turned over to the U.S. military in 1944 from Italy, and apparently enhanced or appropriated by the Vatican itself. He says that the President of the United States may not even be aware of these sophisticated cover-up programs, and that there might even be treaties amongst the U.S. government and the aliens regarding particularly nuclear weapons. Private contractors have had access to the alien technology and have maybe been back engineering. And these claims were all cleared by the government for Grusch to go open publicly about it, which is weird because, and here I'll then turn it over to you, Michael, to give your response. The Pentagon says it has not discovered, I'm quoting the Pentagon statement, It has not discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently, which is really weird since they said they approved Grusch going public. So what do you make of all this? And who are these people you talk? How did you find these people to talk to? Or how did they find you?
Yeah, and I should say, too, I think that the way my interpretation of that last part is that the Pentagon approved the statements not because they're saying that they're correct or that they agree with them, but that he's not revealing classified information and saying those things. So read into that what you will. My piece is a pretty straight reporting piece. I interviewed several people who are either current or former senior military or intelligence officials, either in government or contractors, who verified the core claim that Grusch is making, which is that there are craft that have a non-human origin. That my sources say there's at least 12. One person said 12 to 15. These people I found very credible, sane, very intelligent, confirmed that they are in positions to know these things, or at least they could be in positions to know these things, I should say. I interview a lot of crazy people in my work in homelessness. I interview people that talk about aliens that are clearly psychotic, and the experience is very different from talking to these people. I also talk to people on the street that have, in fact, I've recorded interviews of people on the street talking about string theory that are just that are basically part of a kind of babble or word salad, as we say. That was not my experience interviewing these people. These people were afraid to give their names. I also protected them additionally by protecting their genders and by not revealing which agencies or contractors they work for. They told very specific stories that I think are very interesting. One person told a story saying that there is an effort to reverse engineer these craft, that it's been difficult to do because of the compartmentalization and the stovepiping to prevent scientists and engineers from understanding where the materials are from. And so there was an initiative proposed by a contractor to a major aerospace corporation that was then hotly and somewhat, I think, emotionally rejected by an agency that also this person would not name. There were descriptions of craft. There was one person who did describe the entities, the alleged non-human pilots, but I decided not to write about that because I just felt like you got to draw the line somewhere. I couldn't,
Michael,
I just couldn't quite figure that part out.
But that would be pretty huge.
Yeah.
But that would be even huger than some unknown craft.
That part. Yeah, the other people didn't know about that. And there was also different views of whether there had been any success reverse engineering the craft, with some people saying that there had been success and some people not knowing. I really tried my best in this article to just report it straight without a lot of editorializing beyond my editorializing, which I did at the very end of the article and in my subsequent interviews, where I say, if there's nothing there, and in fact, the more strongly you believe that nothing's there, the more strongly you should want to go into various facilities and look to disprove that there's nothing there. So it seems like I'm always interested in finding practical agreement. And I think that people that are believers and people that are skeptics and people that are undecided like myself should all support looking and having a proper investigation. And as this is an area, there's no doubt that the U.S. military has covered up information about its own investigations for decades. This is a matter of public record. This was revealed again in 2017, but I'm recently obsessed with a 1978 New York Times Magazine article about the U.S. government cover-up of these things. Sometimes it was to cover up secret weapons programs, but sometimes it was to cover up objects that they could not identify or anomalous phenomena they could not identify. So, yeah, is that a helpful overview?
So the through thread for you and your work, because I was surprised to see you writing on this subject, is secrecy, censorship, cover up. This is information that would be super interesting, important world shaking. Why are we not hearing more about it? Why are there lies and cover-ups and so forth? That's the through thread for you.
Yeah, because like I think we all accept some amount of secrecy by our government for things that we think there should be secrets around. But even when you have secret weapons programs, members of Congress are read in, so to speak, into that information so they can have oversight. We are a democracy. We do not want to be ruled by or having unelected military officials or any officials, health officials, make decisions for us behind closed doors. And yeah, you're right to detect that this, for me, really fits quite squarely in my somewhat new interest in government secrecy and censorship. We've done stories now on FBI whistleblowers. And I feel like I'm seeing, and I know other people have been covering it for certainly longer than I have, just a lot of abuse of power. And that occurs when there is a lot of secrecy. And I'm actually working on a story right now about COVID and COVID origins where we saw secrecy. And my view is that, again, I don't want to be, not saying you never have any secrecy. Like if you're going to invade Normandy, you have to have some secrecy. If you're trying to figure out what caused the pandemic, or if you're trying to figure out why so many senior military people are claiming that there are non-human craft, I think that I can't see a reason why that's being kept secret. I can't see any justification for it. Maybe there is a justification for it, but nobody's offered it. And so when you have a situation where there's secrecy and nobody's defending it, I think that's an occasion to go and kick down some doors, so to speak.
Yeah, certainly we don't want the New York Times to publish the nuclear codes for Putin to have. I am a bit conflicted, right. Just as a slight sidebar on Ed Snowden and Julian Assange. It's good to know our government was up to all these sorts of things, I think. I'm not sure about some of the details of who our operatives were in other countries. Maybe that wasn't right. But for Ed Snowden especially, I really was impressed with him. We wouldn't have known about a lot of the stuff that was going on. And as a democracy, an open society, you have to know some of that. I guess the rub is, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, that's that. I think that we've had a system where you have congressional oversight and you do have security around that. I don't know exactly how it works. We have secure compartmentalized information facilities called SCIFs where they get briefings. So I think it's one of the, my sense is that we are, that this is cyclical, that we had the last big cleaning out of the intelligence agencies in the United States was in the 1970s under this Church Committee hearings, which was a truly bipartisan effort. It helped that you had a huge scandal in the form of Watergate, but also secret bombings of Southeast Asia and the spying on Martin Luther King and experiments with psychedelics and all sorts of other kinds of inappropriate abuses of power. I feel like we are overdue for that bipartisan commission, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, where you're not going to punish anybody. We just need to get the facts out and clean house a little bit, because bureaucrats, when you have billions of dollars in secret budgets, it can go to your head and you can start to abuse that power. And so for me, we saw it with FBI. We think there's very strong evidence that FBI has been absolutely exaggerating the domestic terrorism and domestic extremism. We've been showing that Americans remain the most tolerant and the most accepting people in the world of racial, sexual, and religious minorities. This effort to demonize a significant chunk of the country, which you might describe as populist and nationalist, both mostly on the right, but to some extent on the left, I think it's a very dangerous thing. And similarly, I think Grusch's treatment, according to Grusch at least, was poor, and he felt the need to go to a whistleblower because the information from the DoD's UFO study group, which is called AARO, for All Domain Anomalous Research Organization.
Anomaly Resolution Office. Yeah, I know, I can't keep track of that either. That's such bureaucracies, yes. Which was part of the AOIMSG, Airborne Object Identification Management Group. I don't know how you keep track of all this stuff in your head.
Yeah.
I have to write it down.
One of the interesting things I'll also point out, so there was two concerns. The first was that AARO was not passing information to Congress, witness testimony that Grusch and others felt they should have been doing. But then also, and this is something I just learned in the reporting, is that AARO does not have access to intelligence community intel. It doesn't have the right security clearance. And so it raises the question of whether or not AARO is just another blue book or Condon report, where really it appears to be more like a public relations exercise. As there was another government research other research project going along simultaneously to Project Blue Book that J. Allen Hynek and Jacques Vallée did not know about while they were doing their research. And I would like to know, and I'm not of the view that we know what these are, or that these are space brothers, or that they're benevolent or malevolent, or even that they exist. But I think a secrecy breeds potentially very dangerous outcomes. I can't say what it is I'm working on COVID, but I think one of the consequences is the dangers of secrecy in that context as well.
Yeah, when I was researching my conspiracy book and developed a theory to explain why people believe them, one of which is what I call constructive conspiracism. That is, enough conspiracy theories turn out to be true that it pays to assume that they more are than they actually are. So you make a type 1 error rather than a type 2 error, because it's more costly to make a type 2 error. That is to miss real conspiracies. So you start looking into the CIA and the FBI, as you mentioned, Operation MK Ultra, dosing American citizens, the case of the gentleman who he died, or he jumped, or he was pushed or something out of the hotel room. COINTELPRO, tape recording Martin Luther King's trysts in hotels with women. Are you kidding me? And then threatening to make basically revenge porn for being a civil rights. Our government was doing this? Yes, and a lot more. Okay, so we can acknowledge that. Of course, that doesn't mean they're covering up something about aliens. It just means we do know that they're not always forthcoming, and sometimes they actually lie. Now, the people that, let's go back to your whistleblowers that you talked to. Did they just call you out of the blue? Hi, it's Bob from the Homeland Security, or it's John from CIA, and here I am, I want to tell you what I know? Or did you find them, or how did that work?
I found them. Yes, I found them.
How do you do that, just out of curiosity, without telling us too much?
Yeah, I can't reveal that because it would reveal my sources. It would reveal the chain of sources and reveal my reporting. So I'm afraid I'm not comfortable saying that.
So you just,
but I will say
so you just pick up the phone.
It's not that hard. I think I will say it helped to be verbally accosted by members of Congress and not reveal our sources on a big matter, and I think that helped to gain some trust, as did our reporting on the FBI whistleblowers. We're in a changing media environment where we have seen a loss of credibility and belief in the mainstream news media because of things like Russiagate, the lab leak, dismissing the lab leak as a conspiracy theory, and dismissing the Hunter Biden laptop as a conspiracy theory while promoting an alternative conspiracy theory. So I think that the media its credibility is very low right now, and we've seen some others that step up and try to do some of that investigative reporting. So I think some trust was built up from that.
Yeah, so you and I are, of course, aware of the massive social media coverage of this story all week. But there was nothing in the New York Times, CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS News, CNN. Fox News covered some of it, and Tucker Carlson did a little riff on his new Twitter Spaces, or whatever it is he's doing there with Elon. But why is it that if this is the story of the century, I mean, something huge, and the guy is not mentally ill, okay, we can just take that off the table. He's not punking us. It's obviously not a hoax. Okay, Then what? How come the mainstream media didn't cover this?
Like I said, I don't have a lot of. I don't think of the mainstream media as the gold standard of quality media coverage. Here you had the Pulitzer Prize going to people who perpetuated the idea that Donald Trump was a Putin asset controlled and somehow by the Russian government because prostitutes in Russia urinated on him while he was in bed. It was always a preposterous story. We now know from the Durham report that the entire investigation really began from a dirty trick by Hillary Clinton and was picked up by people within FBI that were partisan. So for me, I know that it was a big credibility boost to the UFO community that the New York Times did that 2017 stories on the videos. But for me, I no longer look at the Washington Post and New York Times. I just don't think that they are what they were back in the days of Watergate. So for me, that doesn't come as a particular shock. I found the debriefs reporting to be very careful. I was very impressed that Leslie and Ralph got the folks that they did to be on the record, and folks from within the military industrial complex, for lack of a better word, to say that there were, to also and confirm that there were these programs. So for me, that that doesn't bother me. I heard the same thing that you heard, which is that the Washington Post was interested and Politico was interested, but that they wanted more time to gauge congressional reaction. I think we were all also waiting for a Julian Barnes New York Times piece to come out, and I haven't seen it. So, yeah, this issue is, it's hard because I think on the one hand, people go, where's the concrete evidence? Where's the photos and videos? They didn't let him walk out with that, apparently. That's part of the problem. It's not like Grusch didn't want to have those things. I don't think he was authorized to take them. I can't confirm that, but that's my suspicion. And then I think the other issue is just obviously when you do have photos and videos, that doesn't satisfy people either. Mick West will point out that it could be lens flare or lens glare. It could be a bird. So it's not like the photographic or the famous McMinnville UFO photo. People say maybe it was a pie tin. So even you get to like photographic video evidence, and I don't know that's exactly persuasive. I think that ultimately for me, what we're seeing is a moving of the Overton window from basically there are UFOs, meaning literally objects we can't identify. They've rebranded them anomalous phenomenon, which is fine, but it's the same thing. And there's acknowledged that the military has been studying these things. There's acknowledgement that they've been covered up. And I just think the newest thing is that there are a number of senior people that say that there are non-human craft. And I think that's the way that it's happening very incrementally, but it could go back because like I said, there was a lot more in the late 70s, and then it seems like it dies down for a little while. So when I said maybe we should talk in a couple of weeks, you were like, well, the story will be dead by then, because you also have a recognition that the story kind of comes and goes. And I think the interest from the media follows that as well. And one final thing I'll note is that there was this really wild Las Vegas UFO crash story that occurs like days after the Grusch thing. And I looked at it and I was like,
that felt like somebody was punking him.
Yeah. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not making a statement about it. But for me, it's just much more credible to have people that are inside the system saying that, because that's newsworthy.
Yeah. Having
some scratches on your lawn and a 911 call and that police footage is interesting, but it could be other things. So it's hard.
Well, but the only thing I saw that was that it blacks out the moment the body camera, the person walks to the backyard, and they said, oh, Metro said this is private land, so we're not allowed to show it, which is really unfortunate, because if you really have an 8 to 10 foot being back there, whatever it would be, we should see that. And what do you mean you blacked it out because it's private? If it was a shooting, it would be all over the news. We'd all see it in slow motion. Yeah.
That's very suspicious.
Because I have a long institutional memory of these kinds of stories that come and go with a half-life of a couple weeks. I'm one of those guys that asks for evidence and proof and so on. And I know what you mean about the videos. McWest, he's done the legwork on analyzing the grainy photos and the blurry videos that are hard to make out what's going on. But so my analogy here is the Chinese spy balloon story. When people say, what would it take to convince you, Shermer? The Chinese spy balloon story. There it is. Everybody could see it. We don't care about the pilot. Who's the pilot that shot it down? What was his credentials? Where did he go to school? What kind of awards did he win? Who cares? It doesn't matter. We don't need to know that, because there's the balloon. We can all see it. And there's the debris in the ocean. There's the Navy ship dragging it up, and so on and so forth. The President of the United States gets on the news and says, yes, this is true. The Pentagon says, yep, we shot it down, and so on. And it's covered by everybody. The story's over. It's done. That's what we need for disclosure. Really, just come on, just bring it on out. So I support you on that. I completely agree. Congress, come on. I never believed the stories over the decades that, they're hiding it because the stock market will crash if we find out we're not alone in the universe. What? Why? Or the society would fall apart, or I don't see any of that happening.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a very interesting question of what is behind the cover-up, which we know exists. Yeah, I've heard a lot of different stories over the years. I've heard that some of it is worldview, that there are devoutly Christian members of the military who are against it. I will say I've had a very interesting reaction to the piece I wrote. I have two very strongly Christian friends, one of whom was like fine with it, and the other one was very upset. I have some atheist friends similarly. So I find the reaction very interesting.
Actually, there was a study done about 10 years ago on a poll of just asking Christians and Buddhists and Muslims, Jews, atheists, whatever, how would the discovery of an extraterrestrial intelligence, say through the SETI program or we made contact somehow, affect your religious views? And almost everybody said it wouldn't affect it at all. Our God can do whatever he wants. There could be life, fun, all over the place. So what?
That's interesting. Yeah, so maybe it doesn't have anything to do with that.
I think more likely
What's
if I
your
could
view,
float
Michael? What's your working hypothesis, or how would you probabilistically assess what's going on? How do you account for these high-ranking, high-security clearance people? Do you have theories?
I do. I think you're on the right track when you write here, for example, of your different sources. One source described having seen 3 kinds of craft, including one shaped like a triangle and another that looked like a chopped-up helicopter, with the front bubble of a Huey helicopter with the plastic windows, or more like a deep-sea submarine with a thick piece of glass, bubble-shaped, and where the tail rudder should have been, it was black, egg-shaped pancake, and instead of landing gear, it had upside-down ram's horns that went from the top to the bottom and rested on the ends of the horns. Okay, what in the world is that? Okay, let's, again, take off the table what you said at the top. These are not mentally ill people. They're not punking us. It's not a hoax. Okay, what could it be? I've argued in my other Quillette piece that it's probably not extraterrestrial just because the distances across interstellar space are so vast. The chances of them finding us and coming here over and over, pretty slim. It's more likely to be either our own secret technology that they're just not inclined to tell us about, like the U-2 spy plane or the SR-71 Blackbird, or what actually happened in Roswell, which was this Project Mogul of launching these high-altitude surveillance balloons with microphones, listening for the acoustic signatures of Soviet upper atmosphere nuclear tests. Of course they lied. Oh, it was a weather balloon. So later, the ufologists go, look, they lied. It's, yeah, I know. Governments do lie to their citizens about what they're really up to. We know that. Okay. And so I think your idea of pipe stoving, right, this kind of siloing off of different departments. During the story, I was reminded of why 9/11 even happened. Because the different security agencies, intelligence agencies, were talking to each other. And now, presumably, that's been fixed with Homeland Security or something. I'm not sure it has, but in any case, we haven't been attacked since then, so maybe it is. But that, instead of a vast top-down cover-up conspiracy, it seems more likely incompetence or lack of communication, stovepiping, as you called it, the siloing of different agencies. What are they actually looking at? I don't know. It could be a downed Russian satellite and we recovered it and we're like, okay, here we go. We have their technology. Let's see what they're doing. And if it's any different from what we're doing, and we know that countries do this, they spy on each other. So my other argument in that Quillette piece is that it's probably not super advanced Russian or Chinese technology. I mean, like decades or centuries ahead of us, because that's not how it works. Nobody is ever very far ahead of anybody else, and all inventions come from previous inventions, and everybody knows about them. Even the Manhattan Project, the Soviet had their own nuke within 3 years of our top secret program. And the other analogy I make is like Google and Apple, for all their privacy and security and property rights protections and legal teams that prevent other people from stealing. All the cell phones are pretty much the same. Computers are all pretty much, no one has a century ahead advanced computer that the other companies don't have. Everybody rips each other off. We spy on each other. And so I don't think the Chinese or Russians would have anything that we don't have. We have DARPA. We have the CIA. We have all these super advanced, we have the best higher educational system in the world. How is it possible that they could have done this and none of our scientists have any idea how they're able to pull this up? So I think it's more mundane, like it's just something, some drone or a balloon like the Chinese spy balloon, something like that. And then through the retelling, because people aren't openly communicating, the stories change, they morph. He said, she said, this got passed along and so on. You get the telephone game before you know it. You have Grusch talking about alien bodies and these multidimensional beings or whatever. And that's probably not actually what they're looking at. It's probably something like a downed Russian drone or Chinese spy balloon, something like that.
Yeah. Now, how do you respond to people who go, these are professionals that are used to looking at all sorts of crazy stuff, and they're saying that it's not that, it's Christopher Mellon and Louis Elizondo and the Navy pilots and the Tic Tacs and the whole, they're saying these are experienced pilots, and they're saying these things were just too fast and they turned at right angles, and so sometimes they go underwater. And how do you account for those people that have a lot of experience getting it so wrong?
Yeah, let me see if I can find that video I posted from the astronaut Kelly. I forget which. Oh, here it is. Scott Kelly, the twins there. He posted on his own Twitter feed a speech he gave in front of NASA, saying that you can't trust pilots and astronauts. They're not better observers than anybody else. He cites this example where he's up in the space shuttle and the other astronauts are going, oh, look, there's a loose tool or a bolt in the bay. Oh my God, we got to get this thing before it hits something. And they start looking at it and they're taking pictures of it. And Kelly goes, that's not a bolt, guys. That's the space station. That's 80 miles that way. And they're like, oh, because it sure looked like it was really close. And then he has half a dozen examples like that, like pilots that are like going to dive down to meet their other pilot. Turns out it's a buoy in the ocean. They thought it was floating something up in the air. He's got a bunch of examples like that. He said, you can't, there's nothing special about being a pilot or astronaut that doesn't make you as susceptible as everybody else to optical illusions and things like that. That's my response there. We had a conversation about this last Friday in the Galileo project. Chris Mellon's on the team, Avi Loeb. You should be on this team. You should be up there every Friday. We have a Zoom meeting. It's super interesting. And Chris Mellon, he's really sharp. And I trust what he says, and he can only say so much. So again, without disclosure, real disclosure, come on, tell us what exactly is going on here. We all want to know. And in Avi's position, I'm going to go to the South Pacific and look for this thing that crashed in the ocean near Papua New Guinea and see if it's alien technology. Okay, I think it's a long shot. I think it's probably not alien technology. But if you don't look, then we're not going to find. Same thing with the SETI program. If you don't listen, you're not going to find anything. Okay, so fine. And Chris Mellon, he's also very careful, particularly in our meetings. He's much more skeptical than he comes off in some of the interviews, at least how those interviews are cut and edited, like in the film Phenomenon. He's portrayed like he's really on the UFO alien side. There's something probably going on. But in our Zoom meetings, he's much more like me, much more skeptical. But it could be something, so let's keep an open mind. Okay, I'm all for that.
Yeah. I'm glad to hear that. I know Chris. I don't know him well, but I know his work and also have a lot of respect for him. I'm curious, where do you and Chris Mellon disagree?
I suppose it would just be on, I guess it'd be where you draw that kind of Bayesian line of what the probability is that this is something other than ordinary terrestrial phenomenon. So let me just read to you here the list from Leslie Kean. So I have her book. Here is her classic book, UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. Again, if we had clear and unmistakable evidence like the Chinese spy balloon, it doesn't matter if it's generals or pilots or whatever. Okay, so she writes in there that 90 to 95% of all UFO sightings can be explained as, and here's her list: weather balloons, flares, sky lanterns, planes flying in formation, secret military aircraft, birds reflecting the sun, planes reflecting the sun, blimps, helicopters, the planet Venus or Mars, meteors or meteorites, space junk, satellites, swamp gas, spinning eddies, sundogs, ball lightning, ice crystals, reflected light off clouds, lights on the ground or lights reflected in cockpit windows, temperature inversions, hole punch clouds, and the list goes on. So we don't need Mick West. Leslie absolutely believes that aliens have come here. She says so in many sites in her book and so on. But she says, look, so you have this huge bin, 90 to 95% of everything goes in this big bin. It's terrestrial, it's normal terrestrial stuff. So you have this other two little bins, 2.5% and 2.5%, say, your 5%, of extraterrestrial phenomena or extraordinary technologies from the Russians or Chinese or whatever, or our own government. Yeah, okay. So what do you do when you get a new piece of information, a new blurry video, a grainy photograph, or what do you do with that? Okay, first of all, we don't have to do anything with it. It's okay to just say, I don't know what it is. Let's not go crazy here and deny it or accept it, just and see how it goes. And so here you can apply a Bayesian. Our mutual friend Steve Pinker has a nice discussion of this in his book, Rationality. If you hear hoof steps outside the window and you can't see out the window, assume it's a horse, not a zebra. Although, as Nick Pope points out, unless you live near a zoo where there might be zebras that escaped, or if you live in Africa where there's more zebras than horses or something like that. So the base rate neglect is the point there. So, for example, with the sightings near nuclear weapon sites, okay, of course, there's more cameras and there's more observers near nuclear weapon sites. They're more careful about surveillance because, obviously, and also there's a reporting effect. How many of these nuclear sites have never had some weird thing happen and there's a bright red light and then all of a sudden all the equipment goes down. There's just this one case, Maelstrom in 1964, I guess it was. So what's the base rate compared to what? There's a lot of unusual activity by UFOs. Compared to what? What do you mean by unusual? So the ufologists themselves say, look, most of it goes in the Big Bend. We know what it is. The rest, okay. So the difference, back to your question, difference between, say, me and Chris Mellon, or me and Leslie Kean or whoever, where do you draw the line, that kind of Bayesian probability? To me, they're not up to 50%. The preponderance of evidence, that is 50% plus a feather, just slightly more, okay, I'll tip over to saying, okay, I think that might be true. Always willing to change my mind, update my priors, go more or less if there's new information, that kind of thing. If Chris Mellon and Grusch and you or whoever comes out, here it is. Oh my God, we found the guy. Here's the photos. Here is the actual spacecraft. It's in Area 51 or wherever, Wright-Patterson Air Force or wherever it may be. There it is. Okay, I would just change my mind tomorrow.
Yeah, all that seems very reasonable to me. I'm having a hard time finding things to disagree with you about. Particularly, I think and it seems like Mick is saying the same thing, which is, let's go look. If we agree on that, then it seems like then I don't know if that's the exact same thing. I'm very impressed by the bipartisan nature of this, in the sense that I have conservative friends and liberal friends in the same way that I have Christian friends and atheist friends, that I can't seem to find a pattern. I think maybe 10 or 20 years ago, I would have said it's more liberals than conservatives who are interested in UFOs. But I don't think that's the case anymore. And I'm not totally sure why. And it seems like Marco Rubio and Kristen Gillibrand want to do the right thing. But yeah, I listen to you and I go, yeah, that all seems totally plausible.
Yeah. Yeah. So just, again, there's this thing in Bayesian reasoning called Cromwell's rule that I wrote about in that last Quillette piece, that, that from Oliver Cromwell's famous statement, I beseech you in the bowels of Christ, think you might be mistaken. So you never apply a 0 or 1 to a Bayesian probability. The moon could be made out of green cheese. Just in case, we better not say 0 chance of that. So I agree with that. And so the differences end up becoming, then I think it's 10%, or I think it's 20% or 50% plus a feather, whatever. How do you arrive at that? What constitutes good evidence? In my opinion, so far, the evidence is not that great. Again, that institutional memory of stories like this, the Phoenix Lights in 96 or the alien autopsy film, it took a decade before it was clear that was a hoax. Ray Santilli himself, who presented the film, said, yeah, okay, I faked it because I saw the original, but it was degraded, and so I had to reconstruct it. It's like, okay, sorry, so it is a fake. Yeah, but it's a fake of a real thing. It's like, okay, that's just not going to constitute enough to tip me over to the 50% plus a feather. And I have 100 stories like that. So I have tons of books here. So I have the original Condon report in which he says we looked at 5,000 cases or something, and there's 12 that we can't explain. And then I have probably 200-300 books here like this one, Aliens Among Us. So these are people that have been aboard a flying saucer, inside the spaceships. I've been in the spaceships. Okay, these are all 1950s, 1960s, or more recently. We're not alone. I've been there. I know. It's okay. If you hear enough of these, you go, you know what? Here's another story. I'm sorry. I just can't go with this. As exciting as it would be.
Yeah,
That's
and those are different. Yeah, and those are very different sources than the people that we're talking about.
Yes,
so I think it's part of it. I think that's part of the change, is that we haven't seen this many number of, I think, credible people. And now you can point out, yeah, they can be wrong about things too. There's just a lot of them, and there's a lot more of them. And some of them, like Grusch, appear to be taking very significant risks in order to come forward with no apparent ulterior motive or psychosis. But
yeah,
bottom line, let's go take a harder look at it, and let's not be told that we can't go into certain areas, and we just need a proper investigation.
Yeah. My fear is that we won't find out, and it'll be for some national security reason. So maybe someone like you will dig up and find out, oh gosh, you mean we actually stole one of Putin's spy satellites or planes, and we don't want him to know we did this, because we're not supposed to do stuff like that. Or in the case of the WikiLeaks, that we were monitoring Chancellor, German Chancellor Angela Merkel's cell phones. Like, what? This is not good for for business with other countries. So I suspect it's that our government is doing a bunch of shit like that we don't want people to know that's what we're doing, because they have done stuff like that. And it's embarrassing when this comes out. And so my fear is that we won't find out because it's something like that.
Yeah, you could be right. You could be right.
Yeah. All right. I think we've done that subject to death. We're agreeing with each other. Can I just ask you in our closing minutes, since you mentioned Christianity and the effects that this might have, I was surprised to hear, I just didn't know because I don't know you that well, on Rogan, you said you had found Christianity. What's the story with that? Can you shed some light on that?
Oh, man. Oh,
Is that
do you want to
far
ask a more specific question?
Yeah, sure, I do. Since you're a critical thinker and investigative journalist and so on, with the facts and so on, do you accept that the resurrection of Jesus as a literal fact, or do you take it more as a metaphorical or a mythical? In other words, was there a carpenter? Okay, all right.
I just don't know. I don't know. There's so much I love about my Christianity and my faith, but it's messy, and I'm also an existentialist. I love Nietzsche, and that's a very that's a very paradoxical. Yeah, those are two very paradoxical thinkers. Yeah. So I would say yeah.
Okay.
No,
well,
but please
so to
go
me,
ahead.
these are interesting. These are interesting issues because what should we believe is true? So knowledge is defined as justified true belief. Okay, what's justified? When you push, say, somebody on, do you really think that this carpenter from Nazareth named Jesus was crucified? Did he really exist? I think probably yes. Was he really crucified? Probably. The Romans crucified everybody for anything, so that's not unusual. Was he really dead for 3 days and he really came back to life? Now, that is an extraordinary claim. That's along the lines of we've been visited by aliens. Okay, what's the evidence for this? Not very good. In terms of just a pure Bayesian, let's look at the evidence, the empty tomb, there was the eyewitnesses, this and that. Yes, that's not particularly extraordinary. Post-death visions that people have all the time of their loved ones, that they hear their voice or whatever, not that unusual. The sense presence of people that you love in the room after they're dead, this is not that unusual. But that doesn't mean they're actually still there in some other form. Anyway, this goes on and on this. And 100 billion people, this is how I think about it. 100 billion people lived and died before us. Not one has come back from the dead, except for maybe one. So it's 100 billion to one extraordinary claim. Is the evidence commensurate with that? I don't think so. Some other people do. But here, then a lot of my Christian friends say, Michael, I don't take this literally true. It's not like you're studying somebody's DNA or something. This is not that. It's a different kind of truth. I'm a Jordan Peterson mythic, Joseph Campbell, the myth of the hero, 1,000 faces and so on. Okay, I get that. Totally. That's totally understandable. I have Christian friends that say, I'm not trying to prove anything. It's just what I believe. Okay.
Yeah, for me, I've never been of the view that Christianity means this particular thing. It's much more multiplicitous than that. So for me, it was never like you have to believe that in the resurrection to be a Christian. That's one way of thinking about it. For me, I think one of the most important parts of my faith is that loving thy enemies is one of the most challenging spiritual quests for me personally, and I think for all of us. It's very hard to do that. It's very hard for me to do that. But I think that the effort to do so makes me a better person when I try and when I make an effort to do that. If you can love your enemies, then you're able to love your friends and love yourself and love the world. So I do think it's a religion fundamentally of love and of forgiveness and of compassion. I'm also a critic of compassion without stoicism. So I also believe I love stoicism. I love Seneca and Marco Aurelius. I love Nietzsche, and I think that I've written quite a bit about wokeism. It's the subject of San Francisco, my book, that wokeism is a victimhood ideology, and I think that some of that Christianity to some extent has contributed to a cult of compassion and victimhood ideology. I don't think it has to. I think you can argue that Nietzsche contributed to the rise of Nazism, but I don't think it has to. You may know that Heidegger was a Nazi. The German philosopher Martin Heidegger was a Nazi. He also wrote an absolutely amazing work of philosophy called Being and Time, about really taking core philosophical concepts of the self in the world and the self with others that really became foundational for a new kinds of psychotherapy and psychology and anthropology. And I think you have to live life as though that this is it. I believe in. I have a. I don't know if you can see it. I have a skull behind me. A memento mori.
Okay. Oh,
yeah,
yes.
I have a memento mori. Now that's also that can be used by Christians, but it's often used by existentialists. But I definitely think that I'm sure there's more going on than we are aware of. I'm quite confident that in 1,000 years or maybe 100 years, we will have a different understanding of who we are in the universe, just as we did 1,000 years ago. So,
yes, we're having this conversation.
I love science. I love science and I love evidence. And I'm with some of the. I was on a podcast yesterday and on the UFO issue, and I get just bored with the speculations. I'm really interested. I'm interested in the fact that people will talk to me. I'm interested in the fact that there's senior intelligence and military and contractor types that will talk to me and tell me these things. I've gotten a lot of UFO stories from ordinary folks that see something. I wouldn't write an article about it. And I also haven't really felt the need to write about my Christianity ever, because it's so personal and so private. I'm happy to talk about it with you, but it's not like if somebody tells me that there's a secret US government program to retrieve non-human craft, I actually do feel an obligation to share that with the public, even if people don't believe it, because I do think there's a shared reality there that doesn't belong to me, and that my work has a public interest and I want to serve the public interest. I'm not so sure that my Christianity has any public benefit other than helping me to do what I do, but you could say that about anything and anybody.
That's true. Yeah. I was just curious because I heard you talk about that with Job. We're under the watchful eyes here of Carl Sagan, cover of Time, cover of Skeptic magazine. He put this on the map. He originally made the analogy that the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, the idea that there's something out there far, vastly more advanced and moral than us, is a kind of religious impulse. And I do sometimes wonder if that's what's driving. Of course, when I mention this to the SETI scientists, they're not happy. They don't agree with me at all. We're not religious. It's like, I know. Behind that. Anyway, you've made the analogy that wokeism is like a religion, and John McWhorter makes the analogy that the anti-racism BLM movement and so on is a religion. I think that's right. But it does make me wonder if we structure our worldviews in some way that ends up being like religion, including religions. It's just something in the human cognition that leads us to do that.
Michael, do you think of yourself as somebody having a faith?
Not a faith. No, I'm a secular humanist or enlightenment humanist or so on. The atheism part is irrelevant because atheism is not even a thing. It's just a word to say, I don't believe in God. And it's even that, saying it that way. It's no, I just have not been convinced that there's a deity, but I would change my mind. But that doesn't define what I think about civil rights and women's rights and gay rights and animal rights and the moral arc expanding and so on and so forth. That has nothing to do with atheism. And so I've written quite a bit about this and trying to show that this is something different. And the atheism movement, it's even that's weird. It's like the movement for what? Just like how many times there used to be this like Atheism of the Year award. Who gets that? The person who didn't believe in God the most. I really didn't believe in God this year. Okay, you get the award. It's just a crazy idea. But I do think something like Sagan's very spiritual way of describing the cosmos in his famous series, The Cosmos. The universe is all that is and ever was and ever shall be. Here, and he's standing on the cliffs in Big Sur, just down the street from you, and these magnificent views and the waves crashing, and it's this existential thought deep. This is everything. You just get tingles, as he said, tingles down the spine, goosebumps just thinking about it. That's a religious, I don't know, spirituality, whatever the right word is. Not faith, but just there's something. I suspect, like you just said, 1,000 years from now, we're going to go, oh, so that's whatever it is, right? Then it's okay. Right. Now I can see that we're not alone, that this is what life means in context of these larger things that we now know that we didn't know back in the 21st century. And that's my best argument for being chronically frozen and brought back, just to see how it turns out.
Oh my gosh. And what probability would you give that we are not alone in the universe in the sense of being conscious, intelligent beings?
I would put it at close to 1, that is maybe 99% probability we're not alone, simply because of the law of large numbers. You just crunch the numbers of how many galaxies there are, hundreds of billions of galaxies, each of which has hundreds of billions of stars, almost all of which have planets. So that means there's trillions and trillions of planets. So no matter how low the probability of having the right size planet, the right distance with the right amount of temperature and water, and the first proteins and self-replicating molecules and all the gazillion steps between bacteria and big brains, no matter how low that probability is, when you have trillions and trillions of opportunities, it's just going to happen. Somebody's going to win the lottery. So I would say I support the SETI program. I support the Galileo project to look for these artifacts coming in from outside the solar system. Yeah, because they probably are out there.
Yep.
So let's keep looking.
Yeah, let's keep looking.
Yeah. Michael, I thank you for coming on and talking to me. I really appreciate that. I hope you find something. Keep pushing on this story. And if you ever need a platform to share it, come back on the show, Write for Skeptic, in addition to your many other sources you have. And I'll be watching that because we really want to know. And I, like you, I'm just sick and tired of all the stories and secrecy and classified, can't tell you this, that. Come on.